All right, so other things here. So looking at the energy needs, so as we said before, it's going to be predicated on these factors right here. All right, so what are the physical demands of the training and of the occupation, which, occupation, the challenge is you never know. You never know what you're going to see on a daily basis. So there's going to have to be some baseline level of nutrition that you sustain just to make sure that you're somewhat ready for almost anything all the time, which is not really fair, but that's the environment that you're in. From a training perspective, this time frame is going to be relatively prescribed. All right, so we know that if you're doing wildland training for a week, we know what that's going to look like. So basically, you can eat to kind of accommodate that. All right, so during this time frame, the eating portion, eating for what you're about to do becomes a little bit easier because it's more prescribed than what it will be in the real world. Okay, body weight and body composition goals. So that's the other thing we have to think about, is looking at what are you trying to accomplish from a body composition standpoint. So if you need to gain, lose, or maintain weight. All right, so that's going to influence what that nutritional profile is going to look like. Gender or sex, because sex is actually more physiological than gender is. So looking at male versus female, there could be potentially different needs there as well. Females also we know are going to carry more body fat just by design, and that's okay. But with that being said, we want to make sure that we're offsetting that with enough lean muscle tissue to facilitate the activities that are going to have to be performed. And that's the thing we've seen is like males and females, as long as that lean muscle mass has a relatively high percentage, performance doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference between the two in a lot of different things. All right, so we want to make sure that we're making that balance appropriate. Okay, and then when we look at outside activities and hobbies, it's not just about being a firefighter, right? And I know like right now everybody's like hyped up and ready to do this, but you got to do things outside of here too. All right, have friends that are not firefighter friends as well. That's important as well. And it's hard because I'm probably the worst at this. I love what I do. I love my job. I love my colleagues, and those are some of my best friends in the world, the people that I work with. All right. But you got to get outside of that every once in a while, all right? Not only from a nutritional, I know we're talking about Nutrition Day, but you got to get out of that just so you can kind of renew the spirit and mind a little bit as well, all right? And that's a really important thing. It's one of those things like, and I used this example the other day, and it's going to sound really terrible. I love my kids more than anything. But there's some days where I gotta go, all right, you're gonna have to leave me the hell alone for 15 minutes. Like, if you're parents, you get that. Because like, I will do anything for you, but I just need 15 minutes of me time just to decompress and to get ready. And then I'm gonna be a great dad, but I gotta have that time. Same thing with what your occupation is, all right? Even if you love it, every once in a while you gotta step away from it just a little bit so you can come back renewed and enthusiastic about it. And it's hard because especially when it's your passion, I think a lot of times we have the thought process that if it's our passion, we got to do it nonstop, and sometimes taking a step away actually helps you think about it more clearly and be better at it. So, yes, sir.
Aaron.
Yep.
I know you're not a dietitian, but are there like foods that you can recommend for us to eat throughout the day?
Yep, and we're actually getting there. So, yeah,
because I know a lot of us maybe have like used to eat like multiple meals a day, or like
right.
Here we're only afforded like 1 meal for 10 hour day.
Right. So that's actually dovetailing into what we're going to talk about next. So basically what I just heard is I need to speed up, so I'm going to do that. So guys, this is going to give you kind of a little bit of a chart. So this basically is talking about everything we just talked about as far as energy systems. All right. So looking at the duration of the event and then the different energy systems that are going to be predominant during those time frames. Moving on here, this is going to specifically relate to firefighting. So what's happened here a lot of times, we'll put this in the context of athletic performance. This is how it relates to what you guys have to do. So here we're going to see the energy system that is predominant during different activities. In the middle portion, we see the fitness attributes, so power, strength, hypertrophy, which is muscle size, agility, muscular endurance, anaerobic capacity, and aerobic capacity. And then over here, you're going to see the fire ground task that's going to be involved with that. All right, so hopefully what that does is that puts it into a little bit more context. So you can go, okay, based off of my nutritional needs and the different types of activities I'm going to be performing in, these are basically how those energy systems and the nutritional profile is going to relate to what I have to do from a career standpoint. Okay? All right, so now we're actually going to get to what you talked about. So nutritional guidelines. So guys, like we talked about before, it's not rocket surgery. All right, so the big thing on this one is if you want to maintain weight, you have to take in the same number of calories that you're ingesting. Okay? If you want to lose weight, you have to take in less calories than what you're burning off. And if you want to maintain or to gain weight, you got to take in more calories than what you're burning. All right, so it's literally that simple. So looking at that, that's our basic foundation. And there's a lot of people that will debate this and tell you that that's incorrect and so on and so forth. It just gets down to science and math, really. All right, so this is fundamentally what this all breaks down to. How we choose to get there is where there's a lot more debate. Okay. So this is a concept called nutritional periodization. All right, so basically what this means, if you see that that red line is kind of going up and down there, so that purple line is going to represent kind of a baseline for you. All right, that red line is basically the daily fluctuations in your caloric needs. So basically what that's saying is, like, depending on the day and depending on what the activities for that day are going to be, your caloric needs are going to vary and they're going to change. So, if you have, the next 4 or 5 weeks, you guys are going to be primarily in the classroom, your caloric needs probably aren't going to be as great as they are in the second half of the academy when you're out and doing a lot more training. All right, so that's important to consider and important to know. A lot of times people will, before we said it's important to have enough calories in order to facilitate what you're going to do, that doesn't mean, day one you slap on a feed bag and go. Okay, because probably what's going to happen is in that initial stages, you're going to start putting on maybe some additional fat mass because you're not burning off the calories. All right, so it's one of those things where it's important for us to eat based off what our energy needs are going to be. Okay, and that's basically what that says is, again, it's going to vary over time. So your daily nutritional needs may fluctuate over time. So we have to adjust those to accommodate. Okay, we talked about the energy-bearing macronutrients, so that's going to be your carbs, proteins, and fats. When we say they're energy-bearing, it means that they have calories in them. All right, so carbs and proteins are going to have 4 calories per gram, whereas fat is going to have 9 calories per gram. Okay, so that sounds negative because people look at fat and go, "Ooh, that's a lot of calories." That's actually one of the positive things about fat is it's a big energy reservoir. Okay, so fats contribute to energy as long as we're eating the right kinds and in the right quantities. Okay, so carbohydrates, so we'll talk about this one first. Guys, I've got some handouts here for you that I'll pass out at the break so you guys can have a little bit more information. Carbohydrates are those, there's a lot of misinformation, I think, out there on carbs. I think, for the most part, people kind of have the connotation that carbs are bad. It's not that carbs are bad. They're actually 100% necessary. In fact, that's probably going to make up the majority of most of our diets. The thing is most people just get too much of them or the wrong types, okay? Or the wrong types in context with what the outcome goal is. One of the other things I want you guys to really take away from this is a lot of times we look at food in the context as it's a good food or bad food. Okay, food is just food. All right, so depending on the context is going to determine whether it's a good choice or a bad choice. And sometimes you're going to have to make the better bad choice in some cases. So, if you're stuck and you don't have a whole lot to eat, I want you to be able to look at a food and go, okay, here's what's positive about it, here's what's negative about it, what's the best option here? All right, because it's not always going to be ideal by any stretch. So with carbohydrates, I'm going to read this top part because it's the more sciencey part, but there are compounds that contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, so that's going to be the molecular structure of them. They're found in foods such as sugars, starches, and cellulose. Most are going to come from plant sources. They're found in the body as glucose and glycogen. So again, glucose is going to be in the form of blood glucose. Glycogen is going to be in the muscle tissue as far as the stored source of carbohydrate for our body. So again, during long duration activities, we're going to tap into those glycogen storages to fuel our body. They're going to be essential for energy and preservation of lean tissue and general health. So I think that's the thing that a lot of people forget about is if you're ingesting an appropriate amount of carbohydrates, that's going to spare protein. Okay, because what happens is, like we said before, is if you don't have enough carbohydrates in your system or enough fat and fuel to burn, basically that protein is going to get degraded and utilized as a fuel source. All right, so if you have an appropriate amount of glycogen in the system, it's going to spare that lean muscle tissue. Okay, and again, it's going to help preserve our engines to a greater extent. So that's something that we really have to consider and really think about when we're looking at the macronutrient profiles in general. All right, so this is a basic breakdown of how carbohydrates are digested in the body. We're not going to belabor this, but big point right here is you look at your food or your beverage, it's going to be broken down into glucose, okay, so into sugar. So all carbohydrates are broken down into sugar at some point, okay? So it's going to be broken down into sugar. That glucose is going to enter in the glycolytic energy pathway right here. So this is the food that goes in our body immediately. This is the stored form of glucose. So again, there's 2 different pathways that it can go here. So this may be from the blood, this might be from like maybe the liver or the muscle tissues. So depending again on which one of these are utilized, that's going to yield a net ATP of 2 to 3 ATP by the time it gets through this portion of the cycle. If we choose to continue activity, we slow down the intensity just a little bit. So lactic acid. Okay, so lactate is actually a preferred source of energy in our body. Okay, lactic acid is when lactate and hydrogen combine, and that's what creates that noxious environment within the tissues to where you can't continue on with your activity. Okay, that's when you get that burning sensation. And again, you have two options, either slow down or stop, okay, at that point. So, with that, when you start getting that burning sensation, the option is slow down. If you want to sustain that activity, once that happens, now it stops shuttling to the liver or the Cori cycle in order to create this process, and it enters into the Krebs cycle in order to help facilitate the creation of ATP. So this is the part where we talked about creates that net 38 to 42 ATP. All right? Okay. So general recommendations. So this is, everybody's kind of like, okay, I don't want to hear about the labor, just show me the baby. So this is the big part right here. So this is kind of the takeaway. So recommendations as far as how much carbohydrate you need to be ingesting per day. If you look at this chart right here, okay, there's a massive amount of ranges here. So what you're going to see is you're going to see 3 to 5 grams per kilogram of body mass for light intensity training, so less than 60 minutes per day, all the way up to 8 to 12 grams per kilogram of body mass, and that's going to be based on 4 to 5 hours of training per day. Now that's going to be moderate to high intensity on the bottom side of that. So I would reckon that if you look at this one right here, this is like your people who are like your serious endurance athletes. Okay, so people who are training pretty moderate to high intensities really throughout the duration of the day. Now, for you all, are you going to be in this range right here? So are you going to do like 4 to 5 hours of moderate to high intensity? Probably not. Okay, so you're going to have short bouts of moderate to high intensity, but probably majority of it's going to be more light intensity in nature. Now again, that's not to say that you're not going to have times where you got to kick it up and push, but you're not probably going to have 4 to 5 hours of moderate to high. So we're talking heart rates of 70% and up. All right, that's not going to be sustained for that long period of time. Now, what I would say is if you look at this right here, in general terms, you're probably looking somewhere in that neighborhood would be my guess. So anywhere from probably 3 to 7 grams, depending on what the day may be, depending on your individual metabolism, depending on how much energy you're going to be expending. What I would recommend doing is one, does everybody know how to calculate kilograms? We live in a metric world except here in the US. So basically what you're going to do is take your body mass and divide that by 2.2. All right, so go ahead and do that real quick for me, just so we can kind of have a framework on what we're looking at here. Guys, and with these, honestly, like what I like to do with carbohydrates and with all these different macronutrient profiles is create a range for myself, so I kind of have a basic idea of what my bumpers are or what the guardrails look like. All right, so take that number, multiply it times 3. It's too early, math is hard. So multiply that times 3 and then multiply it times 5. Or sorry, multiply that, your body mass by 3, then another equation, multiply your body mass times 5. So that'll give you kind of a range of what carbohydrate consumption would look like on that low end. Okay, so that's about how many grams you take in per day. Okay, now once you get those two numbers in, so that's going to give you what your carbohydrate profile would look like in grams, then you can multiply that times 4, and that's going to convert that over to calories. So you have a basic idea of how many calories per day you'd be getting from carbohydrates. So what I would do is, I don't know how aware you are of what you're eating right now, but I would track it for like the next couple weeks. So I would weigh today, okay, or well, not today because it's a little bit late, you may have eaten. Weigh first thing tomorrow morning, see what your weight is, track it over the next couple weeks, and then if you see fluctuations, you can make adjustments. So basically, if you weigh the same now that you do in 2 weeks from now, you know that you're having a diet that's going to help you maintain your weight, at least for what your activity level is right now. All right, so again, as that kicks up, we may have to make adjustments, or you may have to make adjustments on that. All right, but that'll at least give you kind of a framework on what you're looking for. If you're losing weight and you don't want to, you can bump up your calories. Okay, if you're gaining weight and don't want to, you can ratchet them back a little bit. So again, it helps you calibrate what you're trying to do. Yes, sir.
Training Coleman, just want to go through that calculation one more time. So
Yep.
I'm 80 kilograms.
Okay.
That's my body weight, so I multiply that by 3.
Correct.
Multiply that by 5.
So multiply times 3, okay, and that's going to give you what, 240? I don't do math in public, so I just want to make sure. All right, so then you're going to take it, multiply it times 5, and that's going to give you 400.
That'll give me 400.
Right.
Okay.
Grams, right? So 5 times 80?
Oh, I apologize. That was times 240.
Right, so that's the range.
Right.
So 240 to 400 grams is what we're looking at. Yeah, so that would be kind of a big, and that's a big range, right? Okay, so looking at that, you can have a seat, sir. I didn't mean to hold you up. So yeah, so that would be kind of a range of carbohydrate consumption, all right, to kind of take a look at. All right, now again, that's a massive range. So that's what I would say is like, look at what you're doing right now. That's going to help give us a better idea of what you might need to do. All right, make sense? Okay, cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to be confusing with my math. It's like I said, before 8 a.m. I don't do math a whole lot, so. Okay, so one of the other things to look at here is like if you look at your total caloric consumption, normally carbohydrates are going to constitute about 40 to 60% of your total diet. Okay, now again, some people will go lower than that. There's a lot of different diets out now that are promoting carbohydrate consumption that's going to be lower. That may or may not be a bad thing. A lot of, again, depends on the context. I will say this is during this time frame for you guys, if you go lower than that 40%, you may have some challenges. Just as far as trying to maintain and preserve your energy. All right, so while you're in the classroom, I would say that you can probably get away with 40 pretty easily. Again, as the activity level picks up, that number may need to increase proportionally in order to make sure that you've got enough energy to facilitate what you have to do on a daily basis. Okay, so this is a great thing that I found, or terrible depending on how you look at it. So let's talk about good versus bad carbs, and I just told you that there's no such thing as good and bad. It's contextually appropriate, but in general terms, when we're looking at carbohydrate selection, we want to pick carbohydrates that are more complex carbohydrates versus ones that are going to be more simple sugars, all right? So on this list right here on the complex carb side, what you're going to see just in general terms, they're going to be foods that are going to be high in fiber and nutrients. So the nutrient value is, they're very nutrient-dense foods, okay, compared to some of your more simple type sugars like, table sugar and things of that nature. They're going to be low on the glycemic index, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a second. Glycemic index is basically just a measure of how fast that glucose or blood sugars are going to get into your system. Okay, it's going to help you feel full with fewer calories. So that's one of the other things, that a lot of these foods are rich in fiber, which again is good for a whole host of other health-related issues as well. So that's going to help slow that digestion process down. It's going to make you feel fuller for a longer period of time, so you don't tend to overeat quite as much. Think about it this way. Oranges, okay, have a lot of fiber in them. Okay, so if I were to sit down, 10 oranges in front of you and say, hey, I need you to eat all these within the hour, okay, you'd probably struggle a little bit to do it because that's a lot of oranges and a lot of fiber to take in. But if I sit like a carafe of OJ down, you could probably hammer that thing. All right, and that's the difference, is because with the OJ, it's simple sugar more or less. It's in a liquid form, so there's not a whole lot of fiber in it to digest. So basically, that digestion process speeds up. So you get this like massive blood sugar or sugar dump. And what happens is the insulin response goes way up. So they talk about when you get the crash after you eat a really sugary food, that would be what that's from. Is because what happens is, to counterbalance that, once you get that big dump of sugar in there, insulin response goes way up. So that's going to signal uptake to the cells of that sugar in order to store it as glycogen. Subsequently, what happens is a lot of times with that excess sugar, so if you think of the cell as almost being like a bucket, which is a very simplistic term, once the bucket is full, it tends to spill over. All that spillover tends to go to fat storage. Okay, so what happens is if you ingest a lot of really high sugar foods, and what happens, you get that massive insulin response. It signals that uptake of the sugar into the cells, and again, we tend to get a lot of it, a lot of calories. So that excess is going to go into the basic body fat. All right. So and that's pretty simple terms, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what we're looking at. The other thing that's going to happen is with those complex carbs, it naturally stimulates your metabolism as well, okay? Because again, to break that down, the process it's harder to break them down than it is to break down just your simple sugars. So with the quote-unquote bad sugars, so they're going to be low in fiber and nutrients, high glycemic index, so again, they're going to have a really big insulin response whenever you ingest them. Typically, it's empty calories are converted to fat, so that's just what we talked about before. So all those excess calories that come in from that sugar, if you don't burn it or store it as glycogen, then it's going to turn to fat. But that's going to be similar with all calories, to be honest. And then high blood glucose levels are also going to be associated with that, which is going to lead to that feeling of being lethargic. All right. So